Hello friends and welcome to another Nostalgia Talk bonus. So if you grew up watching Nickelodeon or YTV here in Canada, then you probably watched a lot of shows that were created by Dan Schneider. The Amanda Show, Drake and Josh, iCarly, Victorious, Sam and Cat, Henry Danger, Game Shakers. I grew up watching most of these shows from the time that I was a kid all the way into when I was a teenager, and they're all really funny. I especially loved iCarly. My friends and I always loved watching iCarly. I've seen every episode of iCarly that there is. Anytime a new episode aired, I always taped it and I'd watch it. I feel like I probably might have watched it a couple of times over the course of one day or week. And how could you not love iCarly's cast of characters? Carly, Sam, Freddie, Carly's brother Spencer, Gibby, and who could ever forget Tebow, Neville, Freddie's mom, Mrs. Benson, Lubert, Chuck. There are so many great moments on iCarly, so many funny episodes, so many funny characters, and it was recently just announced that iCarly is getting rebooted for the Paramount Plus streaming service. That's really exciting, I can't wait. So what I did was, just like the Bert and Ernie video, I thought about 10 episodes of iCarly, and I wrote them down. This isn't a countdown, I'm not ranking any favorites, I just thought of some of my favorites that I'm going to talk about. And now, without any further delay, in 5, 4, 3, 2, number 1, I Can't Take It. I should probably start by going back a ways as I describe this episode. So, in the early seasons of iCarly, Sam was very aggressive toward Freddie, was constantly bullying him, insulting him. It's pretty much all that she ever did. And eventually in the series, Sam and Freddie became a couple. They started dating. And this episode kind of deals with that. I'm just gonna say this, Freddie's mom is unbelievably overprotective of Freddie. Practically every episode shows that. She treats him like a child. So Freddie tried to hide his relationship with Sam from his mom. But Gibby wasn't too fond of it because instead of being mean to Freddie, Sam was being mean to Gibby. So Gibby devised a little plan to try to mess up their relationship. The first step, he told Mrs. Benson, who went bananas. She tried to talk Freddie into breaking up with Sam. Didn't work. So they tried to get Carly involved. Carly reveals some information to Mrs. Benson and to Gibby. Mrs. Benson passes that along to Freddie, and then Freddie and Sam temporarily break up, but Carly tries to get them back together, to which Mrs. Benson tries to stop her. I still remember her charging at Carly like a bull, and Gibby put her in her place. Way to go, Gibby! Gibby! Number 2, I Stake Out. While Carly and Sam were doing an iCarly webcast, they showed some people in their neighborhood doing some kind of bizarre things, to which a cop had seen that, and he said that as he was watching the iCarly webcast with his daughter, he spotted in the footage a suspect that him and his partner were trying to catch. So he asked Carly and Spencer if they could maybe do a stakeout in the apartment. Little does Spencer know that the cop's partner was in fact a childhood bully. Spencer went to sleepaway camp with a kid named Stu Stimbler, also known as Spanky, who, let's just say, was kind of like how I'm describing Sam. Kind of a bit of a bully for no reason. Spanky, it's so weird calling him Spanky. Spanky and Spencer reunite, and Freddie says, "Why do they call him Spanky?" And Spanky says, "I'll show you why!" And then whacks Spencer with an umbrella. And throughout most of the episode, he constantly harasses Spencer. Even his own son attempts to harass Spencer. I will also point out something kind of funny. So, the cops believe that the suspect that they're trying to catch is selling pirated DVDs, illegal copies of hidden movies. But as it turns out, the clerk in the convenience store is actually a filmmaker, and he makes movies about pirates in his spare time and sells those. Also, speaking of pirates, I remember watching this episode as an 11-year-old, and at the time, I was actually in a play where I was portraying the role of a pirate. I have some videos and photos from that play, and I will try to dig those up, and maybe I'll share them. Number 3, I Reunite with Missy. So in this episode, Carly's old best friend Missy comes to the apartment, and they have a little bit of time to catch up, and Sam tags along with them. But Sam's kind of having some bad luck. Carly and Missy go on a helicopter ride, and Sam doesn't meet up with them because Missy texted her the wrong address. So she attempts to check that, and Sam's phone lands in Wahoo Punch, which is a fruit punch brand that's on iCarly. I don't think it's actually available in stores, but I wouldn't mind having it myself. It sounds pretty tasty. So to make up for that, Missy gives Sam these Persian chocolates that Sam loves, but it makes her sick to the point where she can't do an iCarly webcast. Carly attempts to cancel it, but Missy decides to fill in. Sam is convinced that Missy is trying to get rid of her. Carly and Freddie don't really think that that's possible. So Carly, Missy, and Sam meet up at their favorite place to hang out, the Groovy Smoothie. There's many episodes of iCarly that I'll get to that feature the Groovy Smoothie. And kind of talk it over, and Missy says, "No, I'm not trying to get rid of you." And then as soon as Carly leaves, Missy says, "You were right about everything you accused me of." And Carly still didn't believe you. Carly was my best friend first, and I'm taking her back. So therefore, Sam was correct. And eventually, Carly finds out. It's kind of interesting. At the start of the episode, Freddie signs up for this school cruise program. And Mr. Howard, one of the teachers at the school that the iCarly cast go to, tells Missy that she won the contest while getting into a bit of an argument with Sam. So Missy's very happy about that, and she says to Sam, "Now you can be Carly's best friend because I don't have to get rid of you anymore." Little does she know who's behind her, Carly. Therefore proving that Sam was right. But karma got to Missy because apparently Missy used to get incredibly seasick, and still does. Also, there's another plot of this episode where Spencer is trying to get ready for a camping trip, but everything in the basement of the apartment that they live in falls on top of him, and a kid comes downstairs and locks Spencer in I think it's like a storage cabinet. And the kid actually had a past history with Spencer. There was another episode where Spencer was filling in for the apartment's gross doorman, Lubert. "I'm Lubert! I got a warrant!" Kind of a very whiny kind of character, but still really funny. And this kid named Chuck plays racquetball in the lobby, and Spencer says, "You can't be doing that in the lobby." But the kid doesn't really listen, and the father comes down and punishes his kid. And Chuck was not very happy with that and blamed that on Spencer. But realistically, Chuck kind of got himself grounded if you really want to think about that. So the kid that locks Spencer in the cabinet in the basement is Chuck. So close to the end of the episode, Chuck's dad comes down into the basement wondering where his son is. And Spencer says, "He's locked me in here the last 2 days. He squirted me with some weird liquid." Basically, Chuck sprayed Spencer. Spencer's like, "Is this water?" Chuck says, "You wish it was water." So Chuck's dad grounds him again, and they leave, and Spencer's still stuck in the basement. I wonder how he got out. Number 4, I-Twins. Okay, Chuck is back in this episode, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. The plot of this episode is that Sam's twin sister is coming into town from a boarding school that she goes to. And Freddie doesn't really think that Sam has a twin sister. So Sam's twin sister, Melanie, is always in a scene when Sam is not. And so Freddie's like, "Oh, hi, Sam," or Melanie, thinking that it's a game. And so Freddie says to Melanie, "How would you like to go on a date with me?" Just as a way to see if this is Sam, and if I asked you out on a date, you'd be disgusted. Sure enough, Melanie accepts, but Freddie still believes that he is going out with Sam. Eventually, Sam tells Freddie that Melanie doesn't exist just to kind of shut him up. And then at the very end of the episode, Melanie comes into a scene with Sam and Carly. And the other plot of the episode that involves Chuck is that Carly is tutoring Chuck, and then when Spencer finds out, he's a little surprised, and Chuck decides to intentionally bully Spencer, like always, squirting him with something else that's not water. It looks like coffee, but apparently it's not. Loosening every door to cupboards and the fridge, and lying to Carly about it until eventually Spencer installed a camera and showed Carly, "This is what's been happening, he's been lying to you." So Carly devises a plan to intentionally make him fail in math class, which is what she's tutoring him in, by making up a fake number called DERF. So the numbering order in that line would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, DERF. So it's the DERFed number. I hope I'm saying that right. So then it would be 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, DERFteen. And so the dad and Chuck come over to the apartment, and the dad, whose name is Earl, by the way, I forgot to mention, explains Chuck failed his math test, and he made up some fake number called DERF. And Chuck says to Carly, "I learned it from you!" And Spencer explains, "Well, when I was a kid, I had some problems with math. So my dad sent me to a place called Camp Atom Up, a math camp for the whole summer." So a little bit of revenge there. Also, does anybody think that I look like Spencer? I've always had long hair throughout most of my life, and I felt like I've always looked a little bit like Spencer. Even some people I know have told me I look like Spencer. What do you guys think? Number 5, I Get Banned. So with a lot of sitcoms, a lot of the episodes are kind of continuous. Like, they don't always have the same continuous story, but the characters are into the same continuous kind of lifestyles. So I'm gonna kind of explain this one. Tebow, the owner of the Groovy Smoothie, eventually moves in with Freddie and his mom. And if you don't know what Freddie's mom is like, it's kind of crazy. So sometimes Tebow likes to hang out at Carly and Spencer's apartment, kind of unannounced. And that kind of annoys Carly, especially when he's there at night watching movies. So Carly bans him from hanging out at the apartment. Tebow really wants to hang out just so he can get away from Mrs. Benson, and Carly's like, "Oh, not that bad." Tebow eventually bans Carly from the Groovy Smoothie for revenge. And then Tebow says, "How about you spend a day with the Bensons?" And as it turns out, it is as bad as Tebow had explained it. Mrs. Benson woke everyone up a couple of times a night to have fire drills, and eventually Tebow and Carly kind of made up. So they were no longer banned from each other's places. The other plot of this episode actually is really funny. Freddie and Gibby find these girls at the Groovy Smoothie who are dating guys who are somewhat, in their eyes, well, in Gibby's eyes, really nerdy. And so Gibby asks, "How do a couple of hot girls like you get guys like that?" And they said, "We're in a band." So Freddie and Gibby decided to start a band to impress girls, and Sam decided to have a little bit of fun of her own. She got Freddie and Gibby's band, The Floors, which honestly sounds a lot like The Doors, a gig at the Groovy Smoothie, but they don't really know how to play music. So they had to rehearse a bit, and then they decided maybe we could break up during our first gig by getting into a fight. I will also point out that the song that they were rehearsing sounded a lot like The Cars, and I'm a big fan of The Cars, as you probably remember from when I was chatting with Chris Surf. They were such an awesome band, they had great music, and in Freddie and Gibby's song I was hearing a little bit of My Best Friend's Girl by The Cars. Number 6, I Pity the Neville. Again, I'm gonna go back a few episodes. So there's one character on iCarly by the name of Neville, who is an internet personality, has his own website, and Carly, in some of the early episodes, wanted to have iCarly reviewed on Neville's website, Nevillosity, so they did an interview, but Neville only wanted to get into a relationship with Carly, and so after she refused to kiss him, he's hated them ever since and has always tried to intentionally mess up iCarly. In this episode, a video goes viral of Neville screaming at a little girl in a supermarket because she accidentally bumped into him and made him drop his jar of pickles. And he screams, "That was the last jar of pickles in the store. Where's your mother? Were you going to buy this? Now it's broken." And the girl cries. Oh, that poor little girl. And so that makes Neville the most hated person in America in the show's universe. And so Carly, Sam, Freddie, Gibby, and everyone, they have a karma party to celebrate the fact that Neville, who they have always hated, is now hated by everyone. Do you know what kind of food they have at a karma party? Just desserts.
You suck.
Anyway, moving on from that. So eventually Neville finds his way to Carly and Spencer's apartment after the karma party. And he says, "I really feel badly about the way that I acted around that little girl. Can you help me, show the world that I really feel badly about it?" So his first attempt is by giving away at the Groovy Smoothie free smoothies and free cream corn. But nobody really thinks that he really means it. I'll be honest, that's not really an apology. Giving away stuff to other people, unless that little girl was in the lineup, then yes, but that's not really much of an apology. So what they do is they have Neville apologize publicly on iCarly. At first they give him a script and he's reading it aloud, but he just can't read it aloud. He starts crying, almost crying really, and then he looks at the camera and he says, "I hate the way I yelled at that little girl. I don't know why I acted like that, but I know it was really, really wrong. I apologize, and I wish I could apologize to that little girl." Lucky for him, Carly and Sam got in touch with that little girl, and Neville apologized to her on camera. I'm gonna start crying now, it was such a sweet moment on the show, and actually gave her a hug, and she gave him a gift, what he was intending to buy in the store in the first place. Isn't that sweet? So it kind of shows that Neville's not really all that bad. It's a good lesson because there are people in the world who might seem kind of rude and like maybe they'll react in a certain way, but they're people too. They have emotions. They're allowed to feel things, even if they're just so unbelievably arrogant, especially someone like Neville. Because if you've ever seen any episode of iCarly featuring Neville, you kind of know what I'm talking about. Number 7, I Find Lubert's Lost Love. There's a recurring skit that they do on iCarly called Messin' with Lubert, where they like to screw around with the doorman Lubert. And while they were setting up for Messin' with Lubert, Sam accidentally left her phone downstairs. So she tried to get it out of Lubert's office, but found a box of deeply personal items and brought it back up to show Carly and Freddie. And they discovered that Lubert, as disgusting as he is, in fact had a girlfriend. And in the photos that they were looking at of Lubert and his girlfriend Marta, they looked so happy. So they thought, well, what if we find this Marta chick and get in touch with her and we can make Lubert happy? So that's what they do. They bring Marta to the apartment. Lubert sees her and his reaction is, "Get out!" And they're like, well, why is he reacting like that? They looked so happy. And he explained that as time went on in their relationship, she kind of turned into a bit of a control freak. Sam and Carly say, well, we'll get her to leave. And he's like, oh, she won't leave. I tried to break up with her, but she wasn't having any of it. And then they find out that Marta actually is a massive control freak and try to break them up. And Marta seems insanely jealous. Anytime anyone comes into Lubert's life, probably in their past, I wouldn't know, but basically they were trying to talk her into going back, and she says to Carly, so you want Lubert all to yourself. And how Lubert gets rid of Marta is actually the B-plot of this episode. Spencer is on the building watch patrol and Mrs. Benson assigns him a partner. Chuck! Yes, Chuck, the kid that tortured him in some of the last few episodes I mentioned. Basically, they had to try to find somebody who was stealing TV remotes all over the apartment. And as it turned out, because Chuck was grounded and was not allowed to watch TV, he in fact was the thief. So Spencer chases him all around the apartment while Carly is chasing Marta. Sam actually hits Marta with a pineapple to stop her from chasing Carly. And then the police arrive, and Spencer says, I caught the thief who stole all the TV remotes. And Lubert says, it's me! Take me to jail away from Marta! How long was Lubert in jail for? I seriously want to know that now. Number 8, I Enrage Gibby. Another episode that deals with other relationships and jealousy. In this one, Gibby's girlfriend Tasha, who is kind of the opposite of Gibby, and the cast is like, how do you get a girl like that? It's almost like when Gibby was asking the girls in the other episode, how do you hot girls get guys who are ugh? His words, not mine. So Tasha says to Freddie, it's almost Gibby's birthday, and I want to do a little something for him. And as they're talking, they tripped and fell, to which Gibby comes in and assumes that Tasha was trying to kiss Freddie. And he won't let them explain what actually happened. So Gibby says to Freddie, I'm gonna beat you down at 3:02. And he attempts to fight Freddie on iCarly. And thankfully, Freddie had a hidden camera in the iCarly studio while Tasha and Freddie were talking. The hidden camera was actually to record the rotting of toast. So Freddie showed the footage to Gibby on the show, and then Gibby felt really, really badly about the way that he had acted. And the B-plot of this episode is that Spencer's an artist. He's basically a freelance artist who's made all kinds of great sculptures, sometimes very bizarre sculptures out of garbage even. But some of them are actually really creative and clever. But anyway, so Spencer's art gets criticized in the newspaper, the Seattle newspaper, which is where the show is set. And so he destroys every newspaper in the building, and then he finds in the obituaries that he's in it. And everyone in the apartment sees that and wants to buy Spencer's artwork because now it's valuable because Spencer's supposedly deceased. So he pretends to be dead to get more money for his sculptures. Number 9, I Hire an Idiot. Okay, this one also deals with Spencer's art, but again, I'm gonna get to that later. As iCarly continues to get popular, they decide to hire an intern. This episode also features a good cameo from Abby Wilde from Zoe 101, another Dan Schneider show, as Stacy from Zoe 101. And that was kind of nice. A little crossover, I'll say. They also did a crossover of Victorious. And Nathan Kress, who played Freddy, was once on Game Shakers. I think he directed a couple of episodes of Henry Danger. And Miranda Cosgrove, who played Carly, was on Drake and Josh. That's where she started before iCarly. Anyway, I'm rambling on and I don't need to be, so I'm gonna get back to I Hire an Idiot. So Carly, Sam, and Freddy decide to hire an intern for iCarly. So one intern is actually really good. His name is Brad. Brad makes great fudge, and he shares it with the iCarly team. And at first, that's their first choice. And then another guy comes in named Court, whom Carly and Sam think is very, very attractive. But as it turns out, he's not the wisest person in the world. He destroys Freddy's laptop, unintentionally of course, but still. He eats uncooked steaks that were actually props for an iCarly segment. And to get back at them, Freddy hires another intern who's a little bit bizarre, a female, Ashley. And Ashley and Court get along very well. And so Court eventually gets fired for, you know, kind of not being very smart. And he also gets kicked out of college for being dangerously stupid. Poor guy. And Ashley gets fired as well. But it's actually revealed that Ashley was in fact intelligent, and Freddy set them up so that they would have to fire both interns. Freddy thought Ashley was attractive, Carly and Sam thought that Court was attractive. But the opposites didn't think so. They thought that they were dumb. And the B-plot of this episode is another backstory. Spencer went to law school before the events of the episode, but dropped out after 3 days, much to their grandfather's dismay. Spencer is Carly's guardian because their dad is away with the military. So apparently before the events of the show, or maybe even this episode, I don't know how far back, but apparently Carly and Spencer's granddad made a deal with Spencer that if he didn't get one of his sculptures into a museum, that he'd have to go back to law school. So he has to try to get his art into a museum. So he pretends that it's there, even though he's not really allowed to be. Number 10. I Tow Fat Cakes. In this episode, while they're shooting the iCarly web show, Carly and Freddy and Spencer, dressed as the fake mayor of Seattle, give Sam some presents as she has not caused any trouble for the past 10 days before the events. And one of these is a ticket to the Canadian Fat Cake Factory. Fat cakes are a snack, a sugary kind of snack, I guess, that Sam loves. And apparently Canadian fat cakes in this series are not allowed in the US. So Spencer, Gibby, Freddy, and Sam go to the Canadian Fat Cake Factory while Carly gets ready for a date. I'll explain that one later. Sam loves Canadian fat cakes way more than American fat cakes and tries to smuggle them into the US, and they get detained at the border. And the reason that this episode is called I Tow Fat Cakes is because while Carly's getting ready for her date, she's taking a bath and gets her big toe stuck in a faucet. I used to watch iCarly a lot with my buddy Joey, and I asked Joey before I was doing this video, hey, what's your favorite episode of iCarly? And he said that one of his favorites involved One Direction. When One Direction was very popular, or was just starting out rather, they came on iCarly. And in that episode, I'll talk about that one, Carly and Spencer come back from a trip, and Carly gets sick with a highly contagious disease known as jungle worms. I don't know if that's an actual disease or not. Probably not. Let me know in the comments. Or maybe I'm just being stupid. I don't know. And Freddy gets One Direction to come on iCarly, and Carly gets Harry Styles sick. And for those of you who don't know, Harry Styles was a member of a boy band, One Direction. So Carly really looks after Harry to the point where they find out he doesn't want to get better so you can look after him. So they attempt to have Gibby replace Harry on iCarly, but Harry's like, okay, never let him sing again, I'm feeling better. A friend of mine from college named Matthew said that his favorites involved Tebow. Tebow at the Groovy Smoothie would always go up to the characters and say, do you want to buy a bagel or a pickle or something? And they would be on a stick, even tacos. Do you want to buy this? And it's on a stick. Actually, when Tebow started living with the Bensons, They tried to change him up because they didn't think Mrs. Benson would really like the real Tebow. So Tebow kind of had a very hip style voice, but when he was living with the Bensons, he talked a lot like this. And eventually Mrs. Benson found out and kicked him out, but then kicked him back in. So those are some of my favorite episodes of iCarly. What are some of yours? And all episodes of iCarly are now streaming on Paramount Plus, and new episodes will be coming really soon, and I can't wait for those. So until next time, peace! And we're clear.